I used to hold onto a belief, a deeply rooted conviction, born of years spent pouring my entire being into another life, that if I simply loved my child with every fiber of my existence, if my devotion was pure and unconditional, he would inevitably learn the meaning of gratitude. It was a quiet hope I carried within me, a comforting mantra through years of sacrifice. But the reality that unfolded was a stark, brutal contradiction. I never in my wildest dreams envisioned that the very son I had nurtured, the one whose tiny hand I had held through fevered nights, whose every scraped knee I had kissed better, would harbor such cold calculation. He, the boy I raised with my own hands, plotting in secret to take out a substantial life insurance policy on my life. A staggering amount that spoke volumes of his morbid anticipation. And then meticulously planning to stage my death as a tragic, unavoidable accident during a seemingly innocent hiking excursion. The sheer audacity, the chilling premeditation of it all, was a betrayal so profound it fractured the very foundation of my maternal identity. What he, Colin Dawson, my flesh and blood, failed to comprehend was that while he was setting his twisted scheme in motion, I, his supposedly naive aging mother, was already far ahead. The wheels of a much deeper, more intricate plan, turning quietly in the shadows. The phone felt surprisingly heavy in my hand, a significant weight against my palm. I dialed Colin's number, flattening to the familiar ringtone echo in the quiet of my living room. "Colin, I just wired $330,000 to your account." My voice, carefully modulated, was as soft and gentle as a mother's voice is meant to be devoid of any hint of suspicion or strain. It was the voice of a mother offering a gift, a blessing. "Make sure to get some good supplements for Vanessa. Take care of her and the baby, okay? You both need to be strong and healthy, right now." I injected a layer of concern into my tone, painting a picture of a mother solely focused on the well-being of her son's new family. On the other end, Colin's immediate response was a light, easy chuckle. It was the sound of a man without a care in the world, a man for whom everything was effortless. His tone was upbeat, cheerful, almost sickeningly so. It was the voice of the caring husband and grateful son he so meticulously pretended to be a persona he donned with effortless grace. "Of course, Mom!" He chirped back the words, tumbling out like rehearsed lines. "I'm going to be a dad now. You better believe I'll take good care of Vanessa and our little bundle of joy." His words were smooth, perfectly pitched, but lacked any genuine emotional resonance. I lingered on the line, clutching the phone tighter. I wanted to say something more, perhaps just bask in the illusion of this seemingly normal loving exchange for a few extra seconds, to hold on to the fading image of the son I thought I knew. But he abruptly cut me off, his voice shifting slightly, a note of hurry creeping in. "All right, Mom got to run. Got some stuff going on over here." The cheerfulness didn't dissipate entirely, but it was overlaid with an eagerness to end the call, to move on. There wasn't a shred of genuine gratitude in his hurried sign-off, not even a simple automatic "thank you." The absence of those two small words, usually offered without thought between parent and child, felt like a physical emptiness in the conversation. I took a slow, deliberate breath, swallowing the sudden sharp flicker of disappointment that flared in my chest. It was a familiar sensation, one I had grown accustomed to over the years when dealing with Colin. I forced my voice back to its gentle cadence, offering a soft, accepting response. "Okay then, love you, sweetheart." I prepared to hang up, the click of disconnection imminent. But just as my finger hovered over the button, a sound reached my ears, a muffled voice speaking in the background, a sentence that landed like a blow and would forever echo in the deepest chambers of my mind. "Finally, The old woman sent the money. My heart plummeted, a sudden sickening drop in my chest that left me breathless. It was Vanessa's voice, clear and jubilant. I froze, phone pressed to my ear, every muscle in my body rigid with shock. I held my breath, clinging desperately to a fragile sliver of hope, a desperate plea echoing silently in my mind. Maybe Colin would say something, anything, to defend me, even just a half-hearted word or a mumbled protest. Maybe he would push back against her callous description of me. But I couldn't have been more tragically, utterly wrong. Colin's response was swift and chilling. He scoffed a sharp, dismissive sound that cut through the line like a blade. There was no defense, no protest, only agreement and contempt. "She's too damn cautious," he sneered, his voice dropping some of the earlier pretense. We had to fake a pregnancy just to get that money. My fingers began to tremble uncontrollably, gripping the phone tighter and tighter, without conscious thought, the plastic digging into my palm. In that agonizing instant, every single warm memory I held of Colin, every cherished moment of raising him, every act of maternal tenderness, shattered like brittle glass, dropped onto a hard floor. The fragments scattered, leaving behind nothing but a desolate, bitter chill that settled deep in my chest. The truth, stark and unforgiving, stood revealed. Colin had always had a reckless disregard for money, a bottomless pit of need, masked by a charming facade. Before he got married, he had come to me constantly, a persistent presence at my doorstep, or on the phone, always asking for handouts. Sometimes just a few $100s for an unexpected bill, other times thousands for some ill-conceived venture, and occasionally even tens of thousands to dig himself out of a hole. And every single time I had helped him. When he racked up ruinous gambling debts, chasing fleeting wins that never materialized, I was the one who stepped in, meticulously patching up his messes, one gaping financial hole after another. Yet despite my willingness to help, I wasn't entirely naive. Experience had taught me caution. I always held back a little, maintained a small safety net, a hidden reserve just in case. This time, however, the supposed impending arrival of a grandchild, the emotional weight of becoming a grandmother, had led me to drop my guard completely. The thought of supporting my son as he started a family, of helping to provide for my grandchild, felt like a culmination of my life's purpose. And now, in the space of a few seconds, I finally saw the unvarnished truth for what it was. A truth colder than the harshest winter, sharper than any finely honed knife. After the wedding, a palpable distance grew between us. Colin rarely came to visit. The phone calls, once frequent requests for money, dwindled, becoming fewer and farther between. I made endless excuses for him, constructing an elaborate narrative in my mind to explain his absence. I told myself he was just busy, that married life was demanding, that starting a new family required his full attention. I invented 1,000 reasons for his neglect, each one a balm to the wound of his growing detachment. But today, standing in the quiet of my living room, the brutal honesty of his words echoing in my ears, I realized the heartbreaking truth. I had never truly mattered in his world. My role was transactional, a source of financial aid, not a person to be loved or valued. Through the still-connected phone line, Vanessa's cheerful voice floated in her tone, conversational and excited, chatting with Colin about how they should spend my money, already dividing the spoils. I remained frozen in the middle of the living room, the phone still clenched in my trembling hand, while a vast, hollow silence rang in my ears. It felt as though the entire world was laughing at me, a cruel cosmic joke played at my expense. Only when the line finally went dead, the click of disconnection, severing the audio link, did the full weight of it hit me. I was engulfed by a crushing wave of regret. I regretted the endless handouts, the blind faith, the hope I had stubbornly clung to. But the real tragedy was that this devastating realization had come far, far too late. What truly stunned me, what I hadn't anticipated in the slightest, was that just 2 days after that soul-shattering phone call, Colin showed up at my doorstep. After living alone for so many years, the sound of someone knocking a firm, insistent rap against the wood almost felt alien, an unfamiliar disturbance in my solitude. I rubbed my eyes still heavy with unshed tears from the night before, walked slowly to the door, and opened it to find Colin standing there, a broad, artificial smile plastered across his face, with Vanessa right beside him, mirroring his performative cheerfulness. Colin. I managed forcing a warm smile onto my face, striving to keep my tone as natural and welcoming as possible, as if nothing were amiss. "What brings you here today? This is a lovely surprise." He grinned a wide, easy grin that conveyed a sense of everything being perfectly normal, as if they were simply stopping by for a casual visit. He held out a bag, pushing it into my arms without a second thought, his movements breezy and self-assured. "Had a free day, Mom," he said lightly. "Figured I'd drop by and check on you." He gestured to the bag. "Brought you some supplements, too. Thought you could use a little boost to maintain good health." The irony of him offering me supplements after planning my demise was almost comical in its callousness. Vanessa quickly chimed in her voice, saccharine sweet, flashing a smile that was clearly polished and perfectly rehearsed, the kind of smile practiced in front of a mirror. "Helen, you have no idea," she purred. "Colin talks about you all the time at home. He's just been so swamped with work lately. He hasn't had the chance to visit as much as he'd like." Her words were smooth, designed to placate and reassure, painting a picture of a devoted son and a loving daughter-in-law. I looked at the pair of them standing there, a perfect picture of filial piety and spousal concern, and I couldn't help but feel a strange, detached amusement bubbling up inside me. They were so committed to the act, playing their parts with an almost professional perfection. If they wanted to perform well, then I had no problem joining in their little theatrical production. "Well, then that means so much to me," I said, softly patting Colin's arm, leaning into my role as the appreciative mother. "Just the thought of you checking in is a wonderful boost." I stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come on in. Don't just stand there." As soon as he stepped into the living room, Colin gestured for me to sit down, assuming the role of the host in my own home. "Mom, don't just stand there. Let's chat a little." I already felt a strong intuition that this visit wasn't just about a friendly check-in or dropping off supplements. There was an agenda lurking beneath the surface of their forced smiles and casual conversation. And sure enough, after a few minutes of polite chatter, he scratched his head in that deliberately casual way he used when he was about to ask for something significant, glancing sideways at Vanessa for a subtle cue. Then he said almost offhandedly, as if it were a perfectly reasonable minor request, "So, you know Vanessa's pregnant. The apartment we're in, it's just way too cramped for a growing family. We were thinking maybe we could move in with you for a while, just until we find something bigger." I didn't answer immediately. The request hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. I simply looked at them, observing their expectant faces, and offered a faint, unreadable smile. Vanessa quickly jumped in, sensing my hesitation, letting out a soft sigh that was meant to convey hardship and reluctance, as if the idea of imposing pained her deeply. "It's really been hard, Helen," she said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "The place is so tight, and now with the baby on the way, it's just not healthy for me or the baby. We've been eyeing this house for a long time. It's perfect for starting a family." The subtext was clear. My house was their desired dwelling. The single-family home I lived in was more than just a dwelling. It was a sanctuary, a place filled with decades of memories, a solid piece of my life rooted in stability. Nestled near the city center, it offered a rare combination of peace and convenience. Quiet streets, a safe neighborhood, with everything from grocery stores to parks just a short drive away. The property value had long ago soared past the $1 million mark, a testament to its desirable location and solid construction. Colin had grown up within these walls. He knew every corner, every detail. He knew exactly what it was worth, not just in sentimental value, but in cold, hard cash. I nodded slightly, my voice calm, deliberate, masking the turmoil churning beneath the surface. The words I spoke next were calculated, a measured step, in a game they didn't know they were playing. "Of course," I said softly, my smile unwavering. "Of course you can." Colin's eyes lit up instantly, a flash of triumph, momentarily breaking through his carefully constructed facade. Yet something in his expression, a subtle tension around his mouth, showed he wasn't entirely satisfied, that this was just the first step. He hesitated for a beat, then pushed a little further, testing the waters, trying to gauge the depth of my apparent compliance. "Well, since we're going to be living here anyway," he ventured, adopting a slightly more businesslike tone. "Maybe it makes sense to put the house in my name. That way I can handle the property taxes, the maintenance stuff, take care of all the hassle. It would take it off your plate completely." Vanessa followed up swiftly, her voice dripping with exaggerated sweetness, tender and solicitous, yet tinged with a hint of condescension. "Exactly, Helen. We're family, right? You've done enough. You should be relaxing now, enjoying your retirement, not worrying about chores and bills and paperwork." They painted a picture of devoted children, wanting to ease their mother's burden, when in reality they were simply circling their prey. Listening to their little duet, their perfectly synchronized performance of concern and practicality, I felt a strange sense of detachment wash over me, almost like I was watching a play, rather than participating in my own life. There was even a flicker of dark amusement at the predictability of their greed. Once upon a time, not so long ago, I would have agonized over every one of Colin's requests, willingly giving up anything, sacrificing my own comfort and security for his sake. But now, standing there in my own home listening to them plot to take it from me, he acted as though everything I owned was his by default, as if my life's accumulation was merely waiting for him to claim it. He seemed to believe that all he needed to do was utter the words, "You're my mom," and I would instantly roll over, hand him the keys to my kingdom, and bless his every endeavor. But this time, faced with their blatant avarice and the chilling memory of their overheard conversation, there wasn't the slightest ripple of emotional turmoil in my heart. It was as calm and still as a frozen lake. "Sure," I said softly, repeating my agreement, letting the single word hang in the air. Colin froze for a moment, caught off guard by my immediate placid agreement. Vanessa's expression flickered, a flash of surprise in her eyes, quickly masked by her practiced smile. They clearly hadn't anticipated it being this easy, this straightforward. They had likely braced themselves for resistance, for arguments, for the need to wear down my resolve. But I simply pressed my lips together, maintaining my faint smile, watching them curious. "Go on then." My silent gaze challenged them. "Keep playing your little show. I'm curious to see just how far you think you can take it." Ever since I agreed to let Colin and Vanessa move in, the atmosphere in the house had shifted subtly at first, but soon becoming unmistakably different. The quiet peace I had cultivated over years of living alone was replaced by a forced cheerfulness and an undercurrent of watchful waiting. On just their second day here, Vanessa couldn't contain her impatience any longer. She wasted no time cozying up next to me on the couch in the late afternoon light, wearing that same carefully practiced, sugar-sweet smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Helen," she said gently, her voice low and conspiratorial, as if sharing a delightful secret. "How's the house transfer coming along? Did you get started on the paperwork?" I looked up from the book I was pretending to read and met her expectant gaze. I let out a quiet, deliberate sigh, feigning a slight weariness with bureaucratic processes. "Oh, it's progressing," I said, keeping my voice even. "Still needs a few more days. The process is a bit more complicated than I expected. You know how government offices can be." Her smile stiffened for a fraction of a second. Just a tiny, almost imperceptible flicker of annoyance or disappointment. But she was quick to recover her expression, smoothing out instantly, followed by a breezy, dismissive laugh. "Oh, that's fine," she chirped, waving a hand dismissively. "We're in no rush at all. We'll wait. Don't you worry about it." Of course they'd wait. They had no choice. Until that cumbersome paperwork was finalized, until my signature was on the necessary documents and registered with the authorities, the house still legally and unequivocally belonged to me. They were guests, however unwanted, and their plans, however elaborate, were tethered to my timeline. From that day forward, their entire demeanor shifted into something almost disturbingly wholesome, a caricature of the perfect family unit. Vanessa, who previously wouldn't lift a finger, suddenly started waking up early, bustling in the kitchen to make a seemingly elaborate breakfast for me. Colin, the son who hadn't done a chore in years, who treated me like a personal servant, when he was growing up suddenly offered to clean the kitchen, his movements awkward and unfamiliar. Every word they spoke, every gesture they made, was soaked in an artificial sweetness, a carefully crafted portrait of a doting daughter-in-law and a considerate son. But I knew better. It was all a performance, a transparent act, designed to lull me into a false sense of security to make me feel guilty about their supposed weight. They were just biding their time, waiting impatiently for the perfect moment to strike to claim what they believed was rightfully theirs. Colin had never been the type to serve anyone. As a boy, he treated me like a maid, expecting meals magically appearing on the table, laundry done, and favors granted as if they were his inherent birthright. As a grown man, his interactions were limited to requests for money barely bothering with a perfunctory phone call, let alone any genuine sign of affection or appreciation. And now, suddenly, he was wiping down my dining table with exaggerated diligence. What a pathetic joke their performance was. I had poured my life into raising him, sacrificed everything I had for his future, enduring hardship and debt on his behalf. And in return, he saw me as nothing more than a gold mine to be drained dry, a temporary obstacle between him and a large sum of money. That night, sleep proved impossible. I tossed and turned in my bed, the silence of the house amplifying the turmoil in my mind. I was haunted by a question that gnawed at me relentlessly. Was I being too cold, too heartless in my current approach? Had the years of disappointment and betrayal finally hardened me into something I didn't recognize? But then another thought followed. If I were truly cold, would I have forgiven him so many times? Would I have bent over backward, twisting myself into knots to give him chance after chance? Hoping against hope that he would somehow change, I had clung to the belief that sincere, unwavering motherly love could somehow cure his deep-seated selfishness, that my devotion would eventually penetrate his emotional armor. And just as I was questioning my own actions, wondering if I had somehow become too distant, too unforgiving, I heard whispers coming from the living room downstairs. I'm not the kind of person who eavesdrops. It felt beneath me, intrusive. But in that moment, a primal instinct, A chilling premonition compelled me. I moved softly, silently, slipping out of my bedroom and creeping slowly toward the living room door. I pressed my ear to the cool wood, straining to hear, and what I heard became a memory I would carry with me, an indelible scar on my soul for the rest of my life. As soon as she signs over the house. Colin's voice was a low, cold rasp, completely devoid of the cheerful facade he wore during the day. We kick her out. Simple as that. I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. Vanessa giggled a sound of pure, unadulterated delight, barely containing her excitement. Exactly. And by then, all her inheritance should be ours anyway. My mother. Colin scoffed, the sound sharp and utterly contemptuous. She doesn't mean a damn thing to me. She's just dead weight now. An obstacle. His voice hardened further. I've got you now, Vanessa. What do I need her for? A chill shot straight through my spine, freezing me to the spot. It was a physical manifestation of the emotional blow. This was the child I had loved with every ounce of strength I possessed, the one for whom I would have willingly sacrificed everything. I had held our home together, creating a stable environment for him. I had raised him from infancy, watched him grow, celebrated his small victories, comforted him through his failures. I had bailed him out of every self-inflicted mess, every mountain of debt. And now, in his eyes, I was nothing more than a burden, an obstacle to be removed. Where had I gone so wrong? What had I done to raise such an ungrateful, heartless man? Perhaps the answer lay in my own flawed approach. Maybe I had loved him too much, too unconditionally. Maybe I had given too freely, believing that true love was about selfless sacrifice, about putting his needs above my own, without question. And maybe that very sacrifice had taught him that he was inherently entitled to everything I had, to everything I was. My mind, reeling from the present cruelty, drifted back to a memory I hadn't allowed myself to visit in years, a painful chapter I had tried to seal away. Colin was still in college, barely an adult the first time he got seriously tangled up in gambling. He had racked up tens of thousands of dollars in debt, a sum that seemed astronomical to a young man before I even knew what was happening. When the loan shark's shadowy figures with menacing glares came knocking at my door, their threats veiled but clear, I realized just how deep he had sunk into that destructive world. He had knelt at my feet in the living room, sobbing uncontrollably, his face streaked with tears and snot, begging me to save him, swearing on everything sacred that he would never gamble again, that he would change his ways. And I, blinded by maternal love and desperation, had believed him far too easily. I had taken drastic measures, cutting him off from his bank accounts, locking him in the house, hoping that the forced isolation and the severity of the consequences would finally make him see the damage he was doing to himself and to us. But instead of reflection, he had raged. He had smashed things in his room, kicked doors, screamed threats filled with venom and self-pity. "If you keep this up, I'll kill myself," he had yelled, his face contorted with fury, manipulating my deepest fears. Still, even faced with his destructive behavior and emotional blackmail, I couldn't bring myself to give up on him entirely. I wanted so badly, with a desperate intensity, to believe there was still hope for him, that the son I knew was buried somewhere beneath the anger and the addiction. The breaking point, the moment that solidified the change within him, came one day when I brought him a bowl of hot soup, hoping to offer some small comfort. He had snatched the bowl from my hands and, with a snarl of pure hatred, thrown the scalding liquid directly in my face. The hot soup burned my arm, leaving the skin red and raw, blistering instantly. He had stood over me, seething, his eyes filled with a cold, hard contempt. "How long are you planning to torture me?" he had demanded, as if I were the one inflicting pain. I remember kneeling there silently on the floor as tears streaming down my face, not from the physical pain, but from the searing wound in my heart cleaning up the shattered ceramic bowl and the spilled soup while my skin blistered and burned. I said nothing. In the quiet aftermath of that violence, I had wondered, was it wrong to bail him out to give him another chance to absorb his debt and his anger? Or was my real fundamental mistake believing that someone so emotionally hollow, so utterly lacking in empathy, could ever truly learn to love in return? Now, years later on the surface, his life looked more put together than ever. He had a wife, a supposedly stable career, the promise of a family. But beneath that polished exterior, he had only grown colder, more calculating, his greed sharper and more relentless. In his eyes, I no longer had any inherent worth beyond my financial value. That night, after hearing his cruel words, I finally allowed myself to cry, the tears silent and bitter shedding them, until I finally cried myself into an exhausted sleep. What I didn't know, couldn't possibly have anticipated, was that something even more vicious, something designed to wound me at my core, was already waiting just around the corner, poised to strike. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting soft, shifting stripes of light and shadow across the room as I slowly opened my eyes. The house was quiet, the air still holding the chill of the night. Out of habit, a routine ingrained over a decade, I turned toward the side of the bed. Goofy. The small rug beside the bed, his designated spot, was empty. There was no sign of the old companion who curled up faithfully at my feet every morning, nudging me awake with his damp little nose, his tail giving a soft thump, thump, thump against the floorboards. A tight knot of unease began to form in my chest, a physical manifestation of sudden anxiety. I sat up abruptly, throwing off the blanket, and instinctively glanced toward the bedroom door. By now, Goofy should have been there waiting patiently, tail wagging a steady rhythm, his eager eyes fixed on mine, ready for our usual morning ritual. A slow walk in the backyard, sniffing the dew-kissed grass, enjoying the quiet dawn together. But today he wasn't there. Goofy, I called out softly, my voice tinged with mild confusion. Come here, sweetheart. Where are you? I clapped my hands gently, a signal he always responded to with immediate enthusiasm, and walked to the doorway, scanning the living room below from the landing. I checked near the couch, under the dining table, by the stairs. All his usual haunts. Nothing. A prickle of genuine worry intensified my unease. I headed to the kitchen. His water bowl by the fridge was still full, meaning he had been home last night. He hadn't somehow gotten out on his own. But his food dish was conspicuously empty, untouched from the night before. A wave of genuine fear, cold and sharp, started to rise in my chest. Goofy! I called again, my voice louder now, laced with buoyancy, walking quickly toward the back door that led to the yard. I stepped outside. The freshly mowed grass glistened with dew catching the morning light. The air was cool and rich with the scent of damp earth and burgeoning flowers. But I couldn't appreciate any of it. My focus was singular, finding him. Goofy, come on, this isn't funny. My voice echoed across the stillness of the quiet neighborhood, a desperate plea. But only the distant chirping of birds answered me. My fingertips grew cold. My palms felt clammy. That gnawing anxiety had now settled into something far darker, a heavy blanket of dread. I rushed back inside my movements, frantic, searching every room, with a growing sense of panic. I looked behind the sofa, under the bed, in closets behind bathroom doors. I called his name over and over, my voice cracking with emotion. Still nothing. Finally, my search brought me to his dog bed, tucked away in a quiet corner of the living room. That little space, usually a cozy, cluttered haven filled with old blankets, 2 worn toys, a rope and a raggedy stuffed squirrel, and his favorite squeaky ball was now pristine. The blankets were neatly folded, the toys gone, the space empty and bare, as if no dog had ever lived there. That's when the terrible gut-wrenching realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. He hadn't wandered off. He hadn't somehow gotten out. He had been taken. A searing chill shot up my spine, like a cold knife tracing the length of my back. It was deliberate. Someone had removed him. I turned slowly and walked back into the living room, my eyes fixed on Colin and Vanessa. They were sitting at the dining table eating breakfast, without a care in the world, their faces serene, their conversation light. Vanessa was dragging her manicured nails against her plate, creating an irritating high-pitched scraping sound that grated on my already frayed nerves. I paused near the entrance to the dining area, forcing myself to breathe, struggling to keep my voice steady, devoid of the panic and fury swirling inside me. "Colin, Vanessa." I began, my voice trembling slightly despite my efforts. "Have either of you seen Goofy this morning?" Colin didn't even look up from his plate. He bit into a strip of bacon, chewing slowly, and waved his hand dismissively, as if I were interrupting something far more important. "Oh, the dog!" He mumbled around a mouthful of food. "Yeah, I took him out this morning and dumped him somewhere." A deafening roar exploded in my mind, a white noise that drowned out everything else. It felt like my entire body had been hollowed out in a single brutal blow. "You've what?" My voice came out in broken gasps, ragged and disbelieving. My nails dug into my palms so hard I could feel the crescent shapes indenting my skin, an attempt to anchor myself to maintain some semblance of control in the face of this monstrous cruelty. Colin finally glanced up, his eyes lazy and indifferent, chewing his food with deliberate slowness. There was no remorse, no hesitation, just a casual explanation for a deed he clearly saw as insignificant. "It's just an old dog." He shrugged, swallowing the bacon. "Always getting in the way, making noise, shedding. Figured the house would be a lot quieter and cleaner without him." My ears rang a high-pitched whine of shock. My stomach churned violently, a sickening sensation like I'd been punched hard in the gut. The pain of losing Goofy combined with the casual brutality of his words was overwhelming. "You have no idea," I whispered, my voice shaking uncontrollably, my fingertips pale and trembling, what he meant to me. He was my family, my confidant, my sole source of unconditional love in a life where such things were increasingly scarce. He shrugged again, completely unfazed by the depth of my distress. His lack of empathy was a gaping chasm. "Come on, Mom. Don't make such a big deal out of it. He was just an animal." He gestured vaguely with his fork. "You're 60 years old. What are you doing keeping a dog around anyway? You've wasted 12 years of your life, and God knows how much money, on that mutt feeding it, vet bills, grooming. I did you a favor. Now you don't have to deal with it anymore. You're free." I stared at him, my lips quivering, unable to form a single coherent word. The sheer callousness, the utter disregard for my feelings was breathtaking. Vanessa, observing the exchange, calmly set down her fork, dabbed at her mouth with a napkin, with exaggerated politeness, and said casually, as if offering sage advice, "Honestly, Helen, you should be thanking Colin. He made the right decision for you. It's much more practical." I didn't reply. I couldn't. I just stood there, frozen in place, the world spinning slightly on its axis. My eyes drifted instinctively to the coffee table in the living room, where a small faded photo sat in a simple frame. In it, I was sitting on the couch, a much younger version of myself, holding a 1-year-old Goofy in my arms, a fluffy ball of puppy fur, smiling with a warmth and tenderness I could still remember vividly a feeling that now felt impossibly distant. That dog had been my comfort, through lonely years my constant companion, the one steadfast presence in a life marked by shifting relationships and disappointments. He was pure, uncomplicated love. And now they had taken him from me, ripped him out of my life without a flicker of remorse, discussing his fate as casually as they would discuss taking out the trash. The morning sun poured through the windows, filling the room with light, but I had never felt so profoundly cold, so utterly adrift. It was as if my heart had finally given way, collapsing inward into a void so dark and deep, I couldn't even fathom its bottom. Colin had hurt me before inflicted wounds both small and large. I had swallowed the pain, rationalized his behavior, accepted that I had somehow raised an ungrateful, selfish man. But I never ever thought that the final blow, the one that would finally shatter something fundamental within me, would come through the suffering of my innocent, beloved dog. In that devastating moment standing there amidst their casual cruelty, I understood something with painful crystal clarity. The pretense was over. The farce of a mother-son bond, the illusion I had desperately clung to, had to be severed irrevocably and completely, once and for all. By the time I finally managed to tear myself away from the dining table, leaving Colin and Vanessa to their indifferent breakfast, they still showed no signs of remorse, no flicker of understanding regarding the depth of pain they had inflicted. If anything, their demeanor suggested they genuinely believed their behavior was perfectly justified, a logical, albeit unpleasant necessity. I spent the entire afternoon sitting quietly in my room, the door locked, the silence a stark contrast to the turmoil I felt. Slowly, painstakingly, my heart began to return to a state of eerie calm, a stillness that was more dangerous than any outward display of anger. I found myself whispering to the empty air, a silent promise hanging in the stillness. "Goofy," I murmured, my voice hoarse. "If you were still here, I'd want you to see this. See how they will pay for their cruelty. See that their actions won't go unpunished." The next day, I returned home carrying a folder, a document carefully disguised to resemble a house transfer agreement. I walked into the living room where they were lounging on the couch and approached Colin with a calm, measured smile. "All the paperwork is ready," I said in my voice even devoid of any lingering pain or anger. "Consider it a gift to your little family, something to help you get started." Colin's eyes lit up instantly, a greedy spark igniting in them. He snatched the papers from my hand with the speed and eagerness of a man who had just hit the lottery, his voice brimming with barely contained excitement. The sudden noise and his obvious glee brought Vanessa hurrying down from upstairs, her face glowing with barely concealed delight, anticipating her imminent inheritance. She leaned in to scan the document quickly, her smile stretching wider by the second as she saw the title. But when she reached the final page, her expression faltered just slightly, a fleeting shadow of suspicion crossing her face. Her eyes narrowed for a moment, a flicker of doubt clouding her excitement. Then she dropped onto the couch, crossing her legs, with an air of possessiveness, assuming the posture of a woman who had just taken ownership and was now fully in control. "Well then," she said, her voice sharp and decisive, brushing aside any pretense of gratitude or politeness. "I guess this house is ours now. So," her gaze fixed on me cold and assessing, "when are you moving out?" It was precisely the reaction I had anticipated. I blinked in feigned surprise, widening my eyes innocently. "Move out?" I asked, my voice soft and confused. "Where would I even go? I don't have anywhere else." Vanessa shrugged, her voice colder than ever, the last vestiges of her performative sweetness dissolving like sugar in hot water. She was done pretending. "That's your problem, not ours," she stated flatly, brushing away any hint of familial obligation or responsibility. "We're not responsible for where you live. You can find an apartment or something." I turned to Colin, my eyes filled with a calculated plea, a carefully constructed image of vulnerability. "I really don't have anywhere to go," I repeated, my voice small and uncertain. "Couldn't I stay here just for a while until I figure things out?" He looked away, avoiding my gaze, clearly uncomfortable with the direct request, and perhaps a residual flicker of guilt. "There are plenty of rentals out there," he mumbled, shifting uncomfortably. "Just find a place." But I couldn't leave. Not yet. Not until all the pieces of my own plan were perfectly in place. I gently took his arm, my touchlight, and hesitant, my voice soft and subdued like a meek supplicant. "I've been taking care of you both here." I offered, painting myself as useful. "I can keep cooking, cleaning. I won't be any trouble at all. I can help out around the house." Vanessa frowned, clearly weighing the pros and cons, the potential inconvenience versus the potential benefit of free labor. After a moment of calculating silence, she gave a casual nod, her decision made. "Fine." She conceded, her tone begrudging. "Let her stay for now. At least she's useful." In that single sentence, she had cemented her position. She already saw herself as the absolute mistress of the house, dispensing permission to the former owner, as if I were a hired hand. Colin, seeing her agreement, didn't bother to argue. He just shrugged again, his focus already shifting back to the perceived wealth he had acquired. "Yeah, whatever. Stay." I lowered my head slightly, hiding the small, grim smile that curled at the corner of my lips. This was exactly what I wanted. The more comfortable they became, the more relaxed in their perceived victory, the easier it would be to expose them, to bring their carefully constructed world crashing down. The truth was, I had seen through them long ago, long before the fake pregnancy and the life insurance policy. It had started during the wedding preparations, when Colin had relentlessly drained every cent I had, pushing me to the brink of financial ruin, just to fulfill Vanessa's extravagant demands. The ridiculously overpriced ceremony, the luxury car she insisted upon, the hefty down payment for their apartment. I had paid for it all, emptying my savings, justifying it as a mother's duty. And now here I was again, back in my own home, playing the part of an unpaid housemate, a grateful dependent plotting my quiet retribution. From that day on, Vanessa no longer bothered to hide her sense of entitlement, her behavior becoming increasingly imperious. The thin veneer of politeness dissolved completely. "Bring me some water," she barked one afternoon, slamming her palm on the dining table like she was summoning a servant. Her voice was sharp, demanding. "Seriously, you're getting worse at this. Are you losing your mind?" I forced a tight smile onto my face, my muscles aching with the effort of suppressing my true feelings, and brought her the water, the glass cool against my fingertips. She took one delicate sip, then immediately spatted out the water, splashing onto the table and onto my clothes in the process, her face contorted in a theatrical display of outrage. "Are you trying to burn me alive?" she shrieked, clutching her non-existent pregnant belly. "Me and the baby. This water is boiling hot." The fury that surged within me was a hot, violent wave, threatening to shatter my carefully maintained composure. It took every ounce of my willpower to keep my expression neutral, to manage a thin, placid smile. "Sorry," I said softly, lowering my gaze slightly. "My mistake. I'll get you another one, a cold one this time." She clicked her tongue in annoyance, waving me off dismissively. "Forget it. Don't bother." Her tone shifted, becoming the demanding mistress issuing orders. "Go grocery shopping. Make something decent for dinner. I'm starving." I nodded meekly, picked up the reusable grocery bags I kept by the door, and stepped out into the late afternoon sun. But the moment I crossed that threshold, stepping onto the familiar path that led away from the house, a chillingly precise plan had already formed in my mind. The grocery store wasn't just a place to buy food. It was my arsenal, the starting point of my quiet, insidious revenge. I drove to the store, navigating the aisles with calm deliberation, selecting ingredients while simultaneously assembling my version of a revenge menu. No, it wouldn't be something obvious, something they could immediately pinpoint or easily trace back to malice, like serving them greasy fast food every night, or force-feeding them sugar-laden desserts. That was too crude, too simple, too easily detected. No, I would serve them something far more subtle, far more effective, something they would willingly consume, believing it was nourishing and comforting. I filled my cart with what felt like comfort food, but with a calculated twist: high-calorie, intensely addictive, deceptively indulgent dishes designed to slowly weigh them down, fog their minds, and dull their bodies. Creamy, butter-laden mashed potatoes whipped to a smooth consistency, thick slices of rich buttered toast, comforting baked macaroni and cheese, drowning in heavy cream and sharp cheddar. Succulent duck confit, rendered in its own fat-sweet pumpkin soup, made extra rich with heavy cream and a hint of sugar, and of course all their favorite processed meats and high-sodium sauces, the kind that felt satisfying in the moment, but left you feeling heavy and sluggish afterwards. Everything they loved, everything that sounded hearty and nourishing, everything that would feel like a warm hug to their palates, but would slowly, surely erode their health and their sharpness. That night I laid out a full spread on the dining table, a feast of indulgence. Colin devoured the cheesy casseroles and the rich risotto like a starved animal, shoveling the food into his mouth, chuckling between mouthfuls, completely oblivious to the true nature of the meal. "Mom." He mumbled, his mouth full, a smear of cheese on his chin. "Your cooking's better than ever. This is amazing." Vanessa, with an air of refined satisfaction, sipped the thick, oily pumpkin cream soup I had deliberately made extra rich, a pleased smile on her face. She purred, setting the bowl down. "This is delicious, Helen. Looks like keeping you around was a smart move after all. Eat as much as you like." I said sweetly, pushing more dishes toward them, my smile unwavering, a silent observer of their self-destruction. "Don't be shy. You both look like you've lost a little weight lately. You need to build up your strength, especially with the baby coming." It was a lie, of course. They had already begun to look a little heavier around the middle, a subtle sign that the food was working. I watched them gorge themselves, suppressing the grim internal smile that rose in my chest. They didn't notice a thing. Not the invisible trap slowly closing around them. Not the creeping fatigue that would soon begin to set in, not the subtle fog that would begin to cloud their judgment and slow their reactions. And I simply kept cooking. The next day and the day after that, I followed the same pattern, preparing meal after meal of rich, heavy food, ensuring their plates were always full. The more they ate, the calmer. I felt a deep, unsettling sense of satisfaction growing within me. Every bite they took brought me one step closer to my goal. But just as everything seemed to be falling perfectly into place, just as their routine of indulgence and entitlement had settled, something unexpected occurred, something that momentarily threw my carefully constructed plan off course. While I was tidying the living room one afternoon, folding blankets and straightening magazines, I happened to glance at Colin's laptop. He must have forgotten to close it, leaving it open on the couch cushion where he'd been sitting earlier. Its screen was still glowing, paused on a browser window displaying the results of a recent web search. I hadn't intended to snoop. It was a purely accidental glance. But the words on the screen stopped me cold, freezing me in place, my blood turning to ice in my veins. The search queries were disturbingly specific, chillingly direct. How to take out a high-value life insurance policy for an elderly family member. Common methods of going missing without leaving a trace or triggering an investigation. How to reassign a trust fund beneficiary after death. I only needed to read a few lines absorb the horrifying implications of those search terms before a profound chill spread down my spine, settling like a block of ice along my back. In that shattering moment, I knew with absolute terrifying certainty that my life, my very existence, had been reduced to a financial calculation, a target with a specific payout amount attached. Their casual conversation about the money, their eagerness for the house, it all coalesced into a single horrifying image. They weren't just waiting for me to die naturally. They were actively planning to ensure it happened sooner rather than later. Maybe it was fate, a twist of cosmic justice, or maybe it was just dumb, terrifying luck. But that one accidental glance might have just saved my life. Without a second of hesitation, without allowing myself time to fully process the magnitude of what I had just discovered, I grabbed my coat and my car keys and drove straight to the main office of the largest insurance company in the city. Sitting at the reception desk waiting for my turn, I focused on keeping my breathing, even my voice, steady, betraying none of the turmoil raging inside me. When it was my turn, I approached the counter and addressed the employee with as much composure as I could muster. "Hi," I said, my voice slightly strained. "I'd like to check if anyone has taken out a life insurance policy under my name. Helen Dawson." The employee, a young woman with a pleasant but impersonal demeanor, typed on her computer for a few moments, her fingers clicking rhythmically on the keyboard. She then pulled up a file on her screen and nodded. "Yes, Ms. Dawson," she confirmed, her voice neutral. "There is indeed a life insurance policy registered under your name. It was initiated recently." She paused, looking at the details. "Premium tier, actually. One of the most expensive plans we offer." She printed a summary and handed it to me. I took the document with trembling fingers, my hands feeling like ice, despite the warmth of the office. The policy amount was enormous, far more than anyone would typically take out on an aging parent. The beneficiary was listed as Colin Dawson. I didn't need any more proof. The search terms, the policy. It all confirmed the darkest corners of my fears. I knew with absolute certainty what Colin and Vanessa were planning. To them, I wasn't family, not a mother or a person to be cherished. I was merely a payout waiting to be collected, an asset to be liquidated. When I returned home later that afternoon, they were lounging on the couch, flipping through channels on the television, the picture of domestic idleness waiting for me, as if nothing had happened. Colin, surprisingly, actually stood up to greet me, a performance of the dutiful son. He even reached for the small shopping bag I carried, his hand outstretched with that familiar phony warmth. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice overly solicitous. "You must be exhausted from running around today. Anything good?" I kept my expression carefully unreadable, a mask of passive acceptance, as I sat down in my usual armchair. "Not particularly," I replied. I decided to probe to see how they would approach the subject I knew was on their minds. "What's all this about? Everything seems very relaxed today." Colin scratched his head in that practiced, casual way, avoiding my eyes for a moment. He glanced at Vanessa, receiving a subtle nod of encouragement. Then he said, his tone deliberately light, almost offhandedly, "We were thinking maybe we could take you out to the National Forest tomorrow. Get out of the city, you know. Hike some trails, get some fresh air change of scenery. Vanessa chimed in immediately, her voice dripping with feigned sweetness and exaggerated contrition. She even leaned forward and placed a gentle hand on my arm, a gesture of false affection. "I've been so moody lately, Helen." She sighed dramatically. "Snapping at you for no reason, especially with the pregnancy hormones. I'm really sorry. I've been feeling awful about it." She squeezed my arm lightly. "I thought it might be nice to reset, spend some peaceful time together, just the three of us, away from everything. Clear the air." I nearly laughed out loud at the sheer audacity of their performance. The blatant lies, the fake apologies, the carefully orchestrated suggestion for a peaceful time together in a remote wilderness area, known for its treacherous trails and unfortunate accidents. If I hadn't already uncovered their chilling plan, if I hadn't seen the insurance policy and the search history, I might have actually fallen for this little charade of affection and reconciliation. But armed with the truth, I simply smiled and nodded, playing along. "Sure," I said, my voice calm, accepting. "That sounds lovely. A day out in nature sounds very nice. I'll go." They both looked momentarily stunned, caught off guard by how easily I agreed. Their faces for just an instant mirrored the surprise they'd shown when I agreed to let them move in. Vanessa was the first to recover quickly, masking her surprise with a radiant fake smile. She immediately began bustling, ushering me toward my bedroom. "Great then!" she exclaimed, clapping her hands together. "You better go start packing a small bag. We're leaving early tomorrow morning, so you'll need comfortable shoes and some water." I didn't respond with words. I simply rose and walked to my room, closing the door firmly behind me and locking it. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I stared at the empty backpack I used for day trips, my hands slowly curling into fists. I already knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone precisely what they intended to do tomorrow in that remote forest. They would get me out on a secluded trail far from any witnesses and make my accident look convincing. But what they didn't know, couldn't possibly fathom, was that I had started planning quietly and methodically, long before they ever decided to take out that insurance policy or search for ways to make someone disappear. It wasn't just them waiting for tomorrow and their twisted plan to unfold. So was I. But the ending wouldn't be what they had so confidently imagined. After a breakfast that I carefully kept light, ensuring I ate very little of the rich food I'd been serving them, we set off. I sat quietly in the passenger seat of Colin's car, watching the urban landscape gradually give way to open fields and then to increasingly dense barren woods as we left the city behind. The farther we drove, the quieter my heart became, settling into a state of profound calm that felt almost ominous. It was the quiet before a storm, the stillness before a decisive act. They had chosen a remote state park on the outskirts of town, a place called Sable Ridge. I had heard of it before, not for its beauty, but for its treacherous reputation. Every year there were reports of hikers who mysteriously disappeared or suffered fatal falls from its steep, unguarded cliffs. The terrain was unforgiving, the trails often poorly marked and unmonitored, especially away from the main visitor areas. The place had earned a grim reputation among locals as a place where accidents were disturbingly common. Colin knew exactly what kind of place this was. He had hiked here before, in his youth. That's precisely why he chose it. And now I knew it too, with a chilling certainty. "We're here," he announced, pulling the car up near the base of the mountain in a gravel parking lot already sparsely populated with a few other vehicles. As I stepped out, a sharp, undeniable chill crept up my spine, despite the bright daylight and the effort of the drive. This place felt different, heavier. Vanessa immediately looped her arm through mine, her grip firm, her voice overly cheerful, a jarring contrast to the somber surroundings. "Helen, what are you spacing out for?" she chirped, tugging at my arm. "Come on, don't kill the mood. It's a beautiful day." I offered a warm, practiced smile in return, pulling my arm gently away. "Of course," I said, my voice light. "You're right. We're here to relax today, aren't we? Enjoy the fresh air." We began hiking up the steep, winding trail, following the markers higher and higher into the dense forest. The air grew cooler. The city sounds faded, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of birds. We climbed steadily, reaching higher elevations until the late afternoon sun had turned the sky a glowing fiery shade of crimson, casting long shadows through the trees. When we finally stopped to rest near a scenic overlook that offered a breathtaking view of the valley below, we were just a few steps from the summit, perched on a rocky outcrop overlooking a sheer drop. Colin gestured toward a large flat rock nearby. "Mom," he said, his voice sounding a little strained from the climb. "Sit down, take a breather. You must be tired." He reached into his backpack, pulling out a brightly colored bottle. "Here," he said, handing it to me. "It's an electrolyte drink. Thought it might help you recharge, give you some energy." I took the bottle with a seemingly grateful nod, bringing it to my lips just enough to make it look like I was drinking, tilting my head back slightly. But I never swallowed a single drop. The liquid remained in my mouth for a moment before I subtly let it trickle down the side of my cheek and onto the rock as I lowered the bottle. As I did so, I caught a fleeting conspiratorial glance exchanged between Colin and Vanessa. The quick knowing look, the smug, almost imperceptible curl at the corners of their mouths confirmed what I already knew. This was it. The drink was part of the plan. Perfect, I thought grimly. I reached into my own small backpack and pulled out 2 energy bars, the kind marketed as a quick energy boost for hikers. I held them out to them. "You two should eat something too," I suggested, my voice light. "It's been a long climb and you'll need your strength for the way back down." They took the bars, eagerly snatching them from my hand, like hungry wolves, tearing into the wrappers without a second thought. They were so eager, so focused on their own perceived victory, that they didn't even notice the faint, almost invisible tear marks I had carefully concealed on the packaging, tiny punctures I had made earlier. I sat calmly on the rock, pretending to rest, letting my breathing slow, preparing myself. Then, with a sudden, deliberate movement, I let my body go limp and collapsed sideways onto the ground near the edge of the rock, my eyes half closed, feigning unconsciousness. Right on cue, I heard Vanessa's delighted, triumphant laugh. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated glee. "She actually drank it!" she exclaimed, her voice ringing with excitement. "That was way too easy. I thought we'd have to force her." Colin's voice followed, colder than I had ever heard it, utterly devoid of any human warmth or hesitation. It was the voice of a predator closing in for the kill. "Sorry, Mom." He said his words casual, almost bored, utterly chilling in their lack of emotion. "But I really need that insurance money. And the house." I felt them grab me, one on each side, starting to drag my supposedly unconscious body toward the edge, likely aiming for a spot off the main trail somewhere deep in the undergrowth. Somewhere no one would find a body easily, a location that would make it look like I had wandered off in a daze and fallen. I counted silently in my head, measuring the seconds, timing my move precisely. 1, 2, 3. Then a sudden noise, 2 heavy thudding crashes hitting the ground behind me, followed by silence. I opened my eyes and slowly pushed myself up, brushing the dirt and leaves off my clothes. They lay unconscious on the ground a few feet away, their faces slack, their breathing slow and heavy. You see, I had never drunk that electrolyte concoction they offered me. I had only pretended to letting the liquid spill onto the rock. The real trick, the carefully orchestrated counter-move, was in the energy bars I had given them. Over the past few days, while they were gorging on my rich food and congratulating themselves on their cleverness, I had quietly found their stash of sedatives, the very ones they likely intended to use on me. I had slipped a little out just enough for a dose, and today I had simply returned it to its rightful owners, mixed into their seemingly innocent energy bars. "Trying to trap me with your amateur schemes," I muttered under my breath, looking down at their unconscious forms. "You're far too naive, too predictable." I shot them one last glance, cold and utterly cutting, devoid of any lingering maternal feeling, then slung my backpack over my shoulder and began walking back down the mountain, following the trail I knew well. As night fell, the temperature would drop sharply in the wilderness. Wild animals often wandered these trails after dark. If they didn't regain consciousness and find their way back down before night fully descended well, that would be their lesson to learn about underestimating the person they sought to discard. Let them have a taste of real survival for once, a small price for their planned betrayal. I hummed softly to myself as I descended the mountain, step by step, the weight in my heart surprisingly lighter with each pace. The air grew cooler as the sun dipped below the horizon. Just as I neared the trailhead, the parking lot now almost empty, in the fading light I suddenly heard faint cries nearby. Weak, broken sounds calling for help, barely audible above the sounds of the forest settling for the night. I stopped in my tracks, my instincts honed over years of being the one who helped kicking in. I turned toward the sound, pushing aside the brush, and carefully making my way through the undergrowth. There, tangled in the dense bushes, lay a man, his leg clearly injured, twisted at an unnatural angle. His face was pale and contorted with pain, his eyes glassy. He looked to be around my age, perhaps a little older. His voice, when he spoke again, was a strained whisper, trembling with pain and exhaustion. Can you call for help? My phone, it's broken." I didn't hesitate. My own phone was tucked safely in my backpack. I quickly dialed emergency services, explaining the situation and our location. I stayed by his side, talking to him, calmly keeping him conscious and as comfortable as possible, until the distant wail of sirens grew louder, cutting through the quiet night air, and an ambulance finally arrived. At the hospital, I sat quietly in the waiting room, watching through the glass as they wheeled him into the emergency room, a flurry of medical professionals surrounding him. A while later, a doctor came out looking tired but reassuring. "He's going to be okay," the doctor confirmed. "Out of danger, just a bad break, but they'll fix him up." When he finally regained consciousness, lying in a hospital bed, I heard his name clearly for the first time. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice weak, but filled with genuine emotion. He gripped my hand with surprising strength, a gesture of profound gratitude. "I'm Leonard Graham," he introduced himself. "Executive Director of Graham Group." My heart skipped a beat. The Graham Group. The name was instantly recognizable. It was the very firm Collins' company had been desperately trying to secure investment from. For months, the key to his professional advancement. How utterly fascinatingly interesting. Fate, it seemed, had a dark sense of humor and an impeccable sense of timing. I never mentioned the connection between Leonard and Colin, keeping that piece of information to myself for the moment. "You saved my life," Leonard said again from his hospital bed, his eyes fixed on mine, still weak but earnest. "If there's ever anything you need, anything at all, please just ask. Whatever I can do, I will." His sincerity was palpable, a stark contrast to the hollow promises and manipulative words I had become accustomed to. I smiled gently and patted the back of his hand. "I just happened to be there," I said softly, deflecting his praise. Doing the right thing doesn't always need a reward. He spoke with such genuine feeling, but I preferred to keep this unexpected encounter, this quiet twist of fate, to myself, a private treasure in the wreckage of my life. As I rose to leave, sensing that he was stable and well cared for, I saw the hallway outside. His room was already crowded, smartly dressed executives, hurried assistants, concerned friends all rushing in to check on the important man who had suffered a fall. Even lying in that hospital bed, pale and injured, Leonard Graham carried the calm authority of a man used to commanding respect and attention. He wasn't just another patient. He was clearly someone important, someone whose well-being mattered to many. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something in my chest loosen, a heavy weight that had been pressing down on me for years, finally lifted just slightly. I didn't know whether Colin and Vanessa had safely returned from the mountain, if they had managed to wake up and navigate their way down in the dark. But strangely, I wasn't in any rush to find out. Colin had probably never imagined, not even for a second, that his supposedly frail, aging mother, the woman he saw as a burden, was actually a longtime member of a local mountaineering club, trained in wilderness survival and first aid, and in far better physical shape than most people half her age. His arrogance and underestimation were his undoing. That night, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I slept like a baby, a deep, restful sleep undisturbed by nightmares or worry. When I woke the next morning, sunlight was spilling softly across my pillow, warm and comforting. The clock on my bedside table read 10 a.m., a luxury I hadn't afforded myself in years. I picked up the phone, my fingers slightly shaky, my voice breathless, with feigned urgency. "Hello. Please, you have to help me." I cried into the receiver, putting on a masterful performance of a distraught mother. "My son and daughter-in-law went hiking at Sable Ridge yesterday. They haven't come back. They were supposed to be home last night. I'm so worried. Please find them." The operator's voice grew serious at once, responding with immediate concern. "Ma'am, stay calm. Can you give us their names and a description? We're dispatching a search team immediately." 5 hours later, in the early afternoon, I got the call. "We found them, ma'am. They've been located and are being transported to the nearest hospital for evaluation." I took my time getting to the hospital, not rushing, letting them stew in their own consequences for a while longer. When I finally arrived and opened the door to their shared hospital room, I found Colin and Vanessa lying in their beds, pale and haggard, like a pair of thoroughly soaked stray cats who had been out in the rain all night. Their clothes were rumpled, their faces scratched and dirty, their usual veneer of confidence completely gone. Colin turned his head weakly on the pillow, his eyes unfocused. "Mom." He mumbled, his voice hoarse. "Where did you go? What happened?" I blinked innocently, keeping my voice soft, portraying mild confusion and concern. "I'm not sure, sweetheart. It's all a bit hazy." I rolled up my pant leg slightly to reveal a neatly wrapped ankle bandage, a little prop I had prepared earlier with an ace bandage from my first aid kit. "I just remember waking up here in a hospital room. The doctor said it was just a mild sprain that I must have tripped and hit my head." Vanessa gasped, her breath still ragged from her ordeal, her eyes wide with suspicion. We passed out all of a sudden up there." She stammered, trying to make sense of it. "It doesn't make sense. Did you?" I quickly waved my hand, cutting her off with a look of hurt surprise, my voice filled with wounded innocence. "What are you saying, Vanessa? Why would I ever do something like that to you? To my own son, I love you both. I've been sick with worry since last night, picturing all sorts of terrible things happening to you on that mountain?" Colin frowned, his brow furrowed as if trying to piece together the events, his mind clearly still foggy from the sedative and the night in the wilderness. But he said nothing, the effort too much. "Forget it," he mumbled finally, flopping back against the pillow in defeat, too exhausted to argue a question further. During their hospital stay, Vanessa didn't miss a beat in returning to her usual demanding self, quickly shedding her haggard appearance and regaining her sense of entitlement. "I'm craving Boston lobster today," she announced one morning, her voice imperious despite her weak state. "Tomorrow I want abalone soup. I need to nourish my body after that ordeal." Once I would have gently reminded her to eat light to aid her recovery. But not now. Now I simply smiled, nodded, and went to the hospital kitchen I had access to, preparing everything just the way she liked it. And every single day without fail, I added a rich, heavy chicken soup to their meals, a deliberate, calculated addition. She drank it down with satisfaction, believing it was helping her recover and nourish the baby. And I watched her quietly, a sense of grim contentment settling within me. On the day they were discharged, looking slightly better, but still bearing the marks of their night on the mountain and the cumulative effect of my cooking, I knew this charade had reached its final, inevitable act. Colin, eager to resume his life and his pursuit of wealth, returned to his company the very next day, beaming with a renewed sense of purpose and hope. But his optimism was short-lived. He was stopped at the entrance by security, a stern-faced guard blocking his path. "Excuse me, sir," the guard said politely but firmly. "I'm sorry, but you're no longer authorized to enter these premises." Colin froze his face, registering shock. "I work here," he demanded, his voice rising in disbelief. "Colin Dawson, why can't I get in?" The guard didn't flinch, simply checking a list on a clipboard. "System's correct," he stated. "Your name has been removed from the employee list. You've been terminated, sir." Colin staggered back as if struck. He frantically messaged the company's executives, demanding an explanation, only to receive a curt, impersonal reply that confirmed his worst fears. "Your position has been terminated effective immediately. The company no longer requires your services." It hit him like a brick to the chest, shattering his professional identity. He came home in a daze, his face pale and hollow, and collapsed onto the sofa, his eyes vacant. I looked over at him casually from my armchair, feigning concern. "Rough day, dear," I asked, my voice soft. "You seem upset. Did something happen at work?" His lips tightened, his fists clenched at his sides. Then, unable to hold it in any longer, he snapped his voice raw with frustration and disbelief. "Am I really that worthless? After everything I've done for them, why would they just fire me like this?" I walked over and gently patted his head at a final complex gesture that held layers of history and unresolved pain. "Don't be so discouraged, sweetheart," I said, my voice soothing, adopting the familiar maternal tone. "It's just a job. I have money. Plenty of it." This was partly true thanks to my careful management over the years. "I'll take care of you both. You shouldn't stress over work anymore. In fact, why don't I send you two on a vacation? A nice long trip somewhere relaxing to clear your heads a little. What do you say?" He looked up at me, startled by the unexpected offer, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Surprise, maybe even a hint of hope or suspicion. But then he nodded, the offer of escape and financial support too tempting to refuse. "Yeah," he mumbled, running a hand through his hair. "Maybe that wouldn't be so bad. A break." Of course he said yes. I knew him too well, his predictable nature. He never turned down anything that smelled like an easy benefit, a chance to receive something for nothing. Vanessa, ever opportunistic, chimed in eagerly from the other end of the couch, her face brightening at the mention of vacation. "Oh, a vacation sounds perfect," she exclaimed, her recent ordeal seemingly forgotten. "We deserve a break after everything we've been through." And just like that, I booked them a 7-day all-inclusive trip to Thailand. They had no idea this was my final gift to them, one last act of quiet, calculated kindness, a carefully wrapped farewell package. As for me, I was already turning the page, ready to begin a new chapter in my own life. Leonard's business card sat quietly in my desk drawer, a small tangible reminder of a chance encounter waiting patiently. He had called a few days after the hospital, asking if he could see me again. "I still owe you dinner at the very least," he had said warmly. "But honestly, it's not just to say thank you. I really do want to see you again, Helen." I ran my fingers over the raised lettering on that card, feeling a softness in my heart, a tentative warmth I hadn't felt in years, a sense of possibility blooming in the quiet space where pain had resided. Maybe my real life, the one I was meant to live, was only just beginning. The very first thing Colin did after landing in Thailand, even before they had probably cleared customs, was message me asking for travel money, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if my resources were his to command. I transferred the funds without hesitation, clicking the button on my banking app, even adding with a smile emoji in the message, "Have a wonderful trip. If it's not enough, just let me know." That one sentence, that casual offer of seemingly limitless funds, completely unchained their spending. From a few $1,000s for initial expenses to tens of thousands for luxury goods and experiences, from expensive fine dining restaurants to high-end boutiques they indulged without restraint, living as if they had suddenly come into a massive inheritance. And each time he messaged asking for more, I sent the money generously and without comment. Meanwhile, back home in my newly quiet house, I began the process of clearing them out piece by piece, methodically and efficiently. I hired a moving company, their large truck parked discreetly down the street. Together we packed up every last item they owned, their clothes, their toiletries, the piles of junk they had accumulated, anything with their scent, anything that marked their temporary presence in my home. I sent it all, every last box and bag, to the community donation center. Anything remotely valuable items they might have left behind or that I deemed suitable, I donated to local charities. I left nothing behind, no trace that they had ever lived here. Not even a discarded sock or a forgotten book. Then I changed the locks on every door and window, installing a new high-security system. By the time they returned from their so-called luxury vacation, refreshed and expecting to resume their positions of entitlement, my cleanup was already complete, every step executed flawlessly, quietly. As soon as they got off the plane back on home soil, I sent them the final blow, the meticulously prepared invoice that would shatter their world. It was a detailed accounting of everything they had spent during their extravagant trip, every item, every dollar clearly marked. At the bottom, printed in bold, damning letters, were the words, "Borrower Colin Dawson," because none of that money had come from my personal savings or checking accounts. Oh no. I had simply advanced it all through Colin's own high-limit credit line, pushing it far past the limit, just as he liked to do with everything in his life, accumulating debt without consequence. I had merely followed his instructions to send money and let his own name be responsible for the repayment. They thought my money was theirs to take a bottomless well, but there is no such thing as a free lunch, not in my world anymore. Colin's call came quickly, predictably, just hours after they had likely arrived back in the city. His voice, usually smooth or demanding, was laced with panic and raw fury. "What the hell is this, Mom?" he shrieked into the phone. "What are these bills you sent me? What is this invoice? My voice, in contrast, was calm, steady, utterly composed. "The money you spent, Colin," I said simply. "It's yours to repay. Every single dollar." He paused for a moment, stunned into silence, before erupting again, his disbelief fueling his anger. "I'm your son!" he yelled, as if that single fact excused everything, entitled him to everything. "Isn't it normal for me to spend your money to expect your help?" I let out a soft, cold chuckle, a sound utterly devoid of humor. "Really?" I asked, my voice still quiet but carrying an edge of steel. "You still remember I'm your mother. Tell me, Colin, aside from when you needed money, have you ever once looked me in the eyes and said, 'I love you, Mom'? Have you ever done anything for me that didn't involve a financial transaction?" There was silence on the other end. I didn't wait for an answer. I simply hung up the phone. An hour later, the doorbell began ringing wildly, a frantic, desperate summons followed by a loud, insistent pounding against the door. Colin's fist slammed against the wood, rattling the frame. "Mom, open up, you hear me?" His voice was filled with a mixture of rage and panic. Vanessa's voice followed, shrill and furious, joining his demand. "Helen, open this door. Is this your way of cutting ties with your own son? After everything? What kind of mother does this?" I walked slowly to the front door, my movements deliberate, my heart remarkably calm. I unlocked it and opened it just enough to block the entrance, with my body standing firm on the threshold of my home. Colin immediately tried to force his way in, putting his shoulder against the door, but I stood firm, unyielding. "Excuse me," I said, my voice clear and strong. "What do you think you're doing? This isn't your house." His eyes blazed with disbelief and rage. "What do you mean it's not my house?" he yelled. "You gave us this house. You signed the papers." Vanessa sneered, her arms crossed tightly across her chest, her face contorted with fury. "Don't act all high and mighty now, Helen," she spat. "We let you stay here out of the kindness of our hearts. This is our property now." I let out a cold, sharp laugh, a sound that held no mirth. I reached into a drawer near the door and pulled out a folder, tossing it straight into Colin's face. The papers scattered slightly on the porch floor. "Take a look," I commanded, my voice sharp. "Whose name is on the deed? Really?" Colin fumbled with the papers, his hands shaking his face, already starting to go pale as he read the official document. This can't be," he stammered. Vanessa snatched the folder from his hands, her eyes scanning the pages frantically, until her fingers trembled with disbelief and rage. "It still says your name," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Helen Dawson! You tricked us. You gave us a fake contract." I raised an eyebrow, a cool, unimpressed gesture. "You were in such a rush to collect your supposed inheritance," I said, my voice laced with quiet disdain. "You didn't even bother to read the fine print, did you? That document you signed so eagerly it wasn't a legally binding property transfer agreement, just a non-binding property transfer intent form, for display purposes only, not legally valid." Her face turned ashen, the color draining completely, leaving her skin a pasty white. "Why?" she whispered, the fight momentarily draining out of her. "Why would you give us a fake contract? What kind of person does that?" I smiled faintly, a chilling, humorless smile. "Because you were too busy celebrating your perceived victory," I explained, too consumed by your own greed and plans for my demise to notice the last line on the document, the one that clearly stated, "For display purposes only," not a legally binding transfer of ownership. It was right there. Colin, faced with the collapse of his plans and the cold, hard truth of the legal document, lost control. He shoved me hard, his hand connecting with my shoulder, sending me stumbling back a step. "I'm your son!" He screamed, his face red with fury and desperation. "How could you do this to me, to your own child?" I steadied myself, regaining my balance, the physical push barely registering, amidst the emotional wreckage. Calmly, deliberately, I reached into the same drawer and pulled out another envelope. "You're not my son, Colin," I said, my voice quiet but firm, leaving no room for doubt. He froze, his hand still raised from the shove, the color draining from his face, completely this time, leaving him looking like a ghost. His jaw dropped. I handed him the envelope, letting it fall into his limp hand. "This," I said, my voice carrying the weight of a long-held secret, "is a paternity test report. Your biological mother was the woman who broke up my marriage, the woman your father had an affair with." The words were stark factual, delivered without emotion. "She had presented you to your father and then vanished, disappearing from both our lives." My voice hardened slightly. "Your pathetic father was kicked out of my life for his betrayal, his weakness." My gaze fixed on Colin, holding his stunned eyes. "But I continued, emphasizing the word, I took you in. I, Helen Dawson, gave you a home, a name, an education, a mother who loved you with a fierceness you never appreciated. I paid your debts, I bought you an apartment, I gave you a family, a stable life." My voice grew thick with the weight of my sacrifice. "I never had another child of my own because I dedicated everything, every ounce of my maternal energy and love to you. And what?" I asked the question, hanging heavy in the air. "What did you give me in return? Betrayal, greed, a plan to kill me for money." Colin sank to the floor of the porch, like his spine had suddenly snapped, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. He muttered under his breath over and over, No, you're lying. This can't be real. This isn't true." I crouched down, bringing myself closer to his level, looking him directly in his tear-filled eyes. "I've already done more than enough for you, Colin," I said quietly, finally closing that chapter of my life. "More than any biological mother ever could. Now pay back what you owe. The debt from the trip, the years of financial support, though. You can never repay the emotional cost. And get out of my house. This is my home, and you are not welcome here." Then I turned my gaze to Vanessa, who stood frozen watching the scene unfold, her earlier fury replaced by stunned silence. "Oh," I added, a hint of ice returning to my voice. "And about that little electrolyte drink on the mountain, I never touched it. You two were the ones who took your own medicine. I just returned it to its rightful owners." With that, I stood up, turned, and slammed the door shut behind me, cutting them off from my life and my home. Outside, Colin's sobs broke through the silence, deep, ragged, broken sounds of someone who had finally woken up to the consequences of their actions, but far, far too late. And I stood on the threshold of my own life, at last finally free from the burden of their expectations and betrayals, and I didn't look back. All my life, through every challenge, every disappointment, every financial strain Colin had put me through, I believed with unwavering conviction that I had been a good mother. When he lost his way, whether to gambling debt or simply a directionless existence, I was the one who reached into the muck, pulled him out, cleaned him up, and set him back on a path again and again, hoping each time would be the last. When trouble came knocking, threatening to derail his life, I was the one who held everything together, sacrificing my own peace of mind, my own financial security, without hesitation. I thought that if I just loved him deeply enough, if my devotion was pure and constant, eventually, inevitably, he would reciprocate, giving me even a sliver of warmth, a glimmer of genuine affection or gratitude in return. I was wrong, painfully, undeniably wrong. Love, no matter how sincere, how selfless, how deeply felt, never guarantees it will be returned, especially when the recipient is incapable of truly feeling or giving it. The noise outside my door had finally quieted the frantic pounding and desperate cries fading into the background hum of the city. I peeked through the peephole, a lingering sense of caution prompting the action. I saw Colin and Vanessa collapsed on the doorstep, their faces pale, their bodies slumped against the wood, consciousness fading. The combination of the sedative, the stress of the past few days culminating in the mountain ordeal, and years of indulgent high-fat, high-sodium, high-sugar meals had finally taken its toll, dragging their bodies into collapse. I didn't hesitate. I called 911, calmly reporting their location and condition. Later, the doctor who treated them told me they might never fully recover from the physical and emotional strain. Weakness, both physical and perhaps emotional, would likely be their new normal, a constant reminder of their choices and their fall. I gave a small, almost imperceptible smile when I heard the doctor's prognosis. "That's no concern of mine," I said softly. As I turned to leave the hospital room, having fulfilled my minimal obligation by ensuring they received medical attention, Colin managed to whisper one faint sentence, his voice barely audible, a ghost of a plea. "Mom," he whispered, his eyes flickering open for a moment. "I'm sorry." I paused, turning back just slightly, my gaze meeting his. "You're right," I said softly, my voice carrying no warmth, only the quiet weight of finality. "You should be sorry. Sorry for being a thankless parasite." I turned and walked away, leaving them in the sterile white room, a chapter finally closed. Behind me, I heard the sharp, urgent beeping of the monitor, a flurry of nurses rushing into the room, alerted to a change in their condition. I stood outside watching the chaos unfold through the glass window in the hallway, nothing more than a distant observer to a story I no longer belonged to, a narrative from which I had finally extracted myself. Maybe I reflected, maybe I never truly had what people call family in the traditional sense at all. My phone rang, then the sound cutting through the quiet of the hospital corridor. A familiar name lit up the screen, a name that, against all odds, had come to represent hope, and a future I hadn't dared to imagine. "Where are you?" Leonard's voice was warm, steady, immediately calming. "I'm coming to pick you up." The moment I heard his voice, something in my chest, something that had felt tight and bruised and heavy for so long, finally softened, a knot unraveling. I drew in a long, deep breath, feeling the air fill my lungs, wiped away the remnants of emotion from the corner of my eyes, and walked toward the hospital entrance, leaving the past behind me with every step. Soon, a dark sedan pulled up quietly in front of me, sleek and understated. I raised a hand and smiled a genuine smile, this time the first in what felt like a very long time. "Long time no see," I said as he opened the passenger door for me. Leonard smiled back from behind the wheel, his eyes kind. "It's been too long," he agreed. He paused, his gaze thoughtful. "Think it's time we finally take each other seriously, Helen?" I didn't answer right away, letting his words settle. I simply opened the door fully and slid into the passenger seat, the leather cool and comfortable beneath me. Leonard was the kind of man who radiated calm the moment you were near him. Not loud, not overbearing, never trying to dominate the space or the conversation. He never attempted to take center stage in my life, never demanded my attention or energy. But he was always there, a quiet, steady presence, the one holding the light, when I felt most lost or uncertain, guiding me gently forward. In the days and weeks that followed, I began to grow accustomed to his presence, his quiet companionship weaving itself seamlessly into the fabric of my life. He didn't try to fix me or tell me what to do. He simply shared his world with me. He took me to small-town book clubs where we discussed literature with passionate strangers, encouraged me to join a pottery class at the local art center where I rediscovered the simple joy of creating something with my hands. We walked together in the mornings, the crisp air filling our lungs, sharing quiet conversation or comfortable silence. We cooked together in the afternoons, experimenting with new recipes that were light and flavorful, a stark contrast to the heavy, deliberate meals I had recently prepared. He listened patiently as I talked about Goofy, letting me grieve the loss of my beloved companion without judgment. And he let me share the darker memories, the painful chapters with Colin when they surfaced, sitting quietly and simply being present. I began redecorating the house, a physical manifestation of reclaiming my space, stripping away all the remnants of a life I once arranged for someone else, clearing out the emotional clutter, along with the physical. I replaced the old worn pieces that reminded me of Colin with things that brought me joy, filling the space with my own tastes and passions. The kitchen, once a battleground of obligation and resentment, became a place of peace and creativity where I now cooked only for myself, nourishing my own body and spirit. In the backyard, I planted an herb garden, vibrant, mint-fragrant rosemary, soothing lavender. They thrived under the warm sun, their growth mirroring how my own spirit had begun to heal and flourish. Leonard never made grand sweeping promises about the future. He didn't talk of forever or of happily ever afters in the traditional sense. He simply stayed quietly, steadily, living beside me, not for me, allowing me the space and freedom to become myself again. Sometimes we'd sit together on the porch in the evenings, cups of tea warming our hands, and he'd gently take my fingers in his and say, his voice low and kind, "Helen, you finally stopped living for everyone else." I would smile and nod, the truth of his words resonating deep within me. Yes, I was finally living for me, discovering who I was, without the defining labels of mother or savior. One afternoon, several weeks later, I received an anonymous package in the mail. Inside were a few internal documents printed on crisp corporate letterhead. They detailed executive-level personnel changes at Graham Group. Colin's name had been completely erased from every project file, every team roster, every company record. It was as if he had never worked there. I didn't ask who sent it. I already knew. Leonard didn't say a word about the package either when I showed it to him. He just brewed me a fresh cup of coffee just the way I liked it and set it quietly on the table beside me, a simple gesture of understanding and support, like he always did. I took the cup, feeling its warmth, looked at him, and smiled, a deep, heartfelt smile filled with gratitude. "Thank you," I said softly. He only smiled back, saying nothing, the silence between us comfortable and full of meaning. In that moment, I realized something profound. Real happiness doesn't always arrive with fanfare or fireworks, not in a grand, dramatic declaration. Sometimes it simply comes after the storm, quietly settling around you in the form of a steady hand reaching gently for yours, a shared cup of coffee, a silent understanding that transcends words. 60 years of life filled with love and sacrifice, disappointment and betrayal, but finally, I was no longer trapped by the crumbling walls of one broken, toxic relationship. As for what comes next, I don't know if my twilight years will ever read like a fairy tale romance or follow a perfectly scripted path. But I do know this with absolute certainty. I am writing my own story now, choosing the characters, dictating the plot, and deciding my own ending. That evening, Leonard and I sat together in the backyard as the sun slowly sank behind the trees, casting long golden shadows across the lawn. Old jazz records played softly on the vintage turntable on the porch, the music mingling with the scent of the herbs I had planted. "Helen," Leonard asked gently, his voice quiet in the gathering dusk, "do you think you'll ever fall in love again?" I turned to look at him, the soft light catching my face. My eyes were calm and certain, reflecting the peace I had finally found. "Maybe," I said softly, a gentle smile playing on my lips. "Maybe I already am."